on June 27, Jayland Walker was pulled over by the police for an unspecified traffic violation. He did not survive the encounter. Bodycam footage released a few days after the incident showed an unarmed Walker being hit by a spray of 60 bullets from officers. Whilst details are still unclear about the background to the shooting, protests erupted in his home city of Akron, Ohio, in scenes that bring back a sense of deja vu from the summer of 2 years ago, where protests erupted worldwide following the killing of George Floyd, as well as the deaths of Breonna Taylor, Elijah McClain, Tamir Rice, and many, many more. But if these deaths keep on happening, are all of these protests in vain? Will violent protests help their cause, or will it turn people away? Has anything changed for the Black Lives Matter movement since 2020?
So, gentlemen, before we engage in a conversation, let's kickstart this debate by a round of 30 seconds each. Has anything changed for the Black Lives Matter movement since 2020? Dr. Dibinga, please take the lead.
Well, first of all, much indeed has changed. I think that people focus too much on some activities that may happen at rallies, but we are seeing more increased representation in executive spaces. We are seeing more diverse curricula in our schools. We are seeing some areas where there's community interactions as it relates to police. And so also in terms of issues relating to representation in the media. So there have indeed been changes and more needs to be done.
And we will, of course, pick up on all of that a bit later. Mr. Katz, please, your take.
And by the way, I can't see the screen for some reason. But anyway, I think the Black Lives Matter movement would be tremendously served if, at a leadership level, whatever negative things happen at rallies were denounced, with chants of fry the police like bacon or property damage, rioting, things like that, because there are a lot of people who are without any doubt turned off by that reaction, and it frankly it distracts from the issue, which is, in a particular specific instance, did the police act inappropriately?
Interesting. And last but definitely not least, Dr. Eaves, your stance?
Well, I think we made baby steps. I think we have made some progress here in this country in terms of diversity and representation, particularly for Black people. But at the end of the day, I'm a Black man, and I'm also the father of Black children. And I'm very sick and tired of seeing Black men like this man killed this week unarmed. And so as Femi Lou Hamer once said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yes, definitely. And on that note, let's please feel free rather to interact from this point onwards. Is the debate, gentlemen, is over the police use of force or police use of force vis-a-vis the African American community? Dr. Eaves.
Well, the first thing I would like to say is that when we talk about leadership of Black Lives Matter condemning violence, it actually happens. It happens on a regular basis. I actually know some of the founders of Black Lives Matter, and so I'm speaking from personal experience. I've seen many condemn the violence. As it relates to your question about the issue of the violence with the police, it's an issue of violence with the police, but if you want to change the issue, you got to target the group that is disproportionately affected, and that is African American people. And so we have to look at what's happening. We have to look at issues such as members of neo-Nazi organizations and racists that have been known by the FBI to be infiltrating police departments as well as the military. And we have to look at issues like that in order to root these out, because there has to be a particular reason why Black people are being targeted the most. Another example, we see police departments using pictures of Black men in their targeting practices. And so more work needs to be done. But if you hit the people who are suffering the most, you create policies that help stop police violence against all groups of people.
But Dr. Eaves, the battle, please. Yeah, please.
Yeah, okay. I've been a law enforcement trainer for, 30 some odd years. I have never once seen an African-American photograph, picture, target being used in training, ever. Does it happen? Maybe it has.
The story just came out last week, and the police chief said he's going to take it. The story's out.
Okay.
Sure, but let it be recent.
Thank you. So what I think is important is that when we look at an issue, we have to look at the totality of circumstances. And I have said when unarmed black men or unarmed white men have been shot by police, I denounce it. But we have to take this story back a little bit because you didn't report this at all. You didn't report that we have a confirmation of a muzzle flash occurring from inside the Walker car. And we know it was a gun. How do we know? We received because the weapon was retrieved. The empty shell casing was retrieved. So we have a little bit of a different tale when you look at the whole circumstance. We have a shot fired at pursuing police. We have an encounter which apparently, at least at one point, the officers tried to deploy a taser. Now, according to, and I've seen they're very grainy photos. I have not been able to see enhanced photos yet. We see what appears to be Mr. Walker turning and reaching to the waistband. In that case, you have justification. If it's not, it's not a justified shooting. But just to blanketly start the reporting, but we have an unarmed black man who was shot. Yeah. Well, let's get the whole picture told.
But, well, you know what, until the details get a bit less blurry, let's perhaps look at what could be seen as glass half full police handling of this situation, the aftermath, that is, this press conference. We've seen those body cam documentations. We've seen the 8 officers being sent on an unpaid leave. Can we see it as progress to an extent? Again, the police handling of the aftermath of the situation?
Well, let me jump in.
Please.
There's something called implicit bias. And I can't speak to whether or not there are pictures within a police precinct of black men or white men, et cetera. But there is something called implicit bias. And I believe that implicit bias is at work, not only within law enforcement, but in many other aspects of American life. And so when you look at the proportion of black men who have violent, deadly encounters with police, the percentage is higher for black people than other people in the United States. And I think a lot of that is attributable to what's called implicit bias. It's something that's...
May I ask a question?
Please, Mr. Katz.
Do you know that the odds of an officer being shot to death by an African American percentage-wise is a lot higher than us? So we have statistics, but that what you just said is a very unfair one.
I got statistics too, by the way, when you get a chance.
Wait, hang on. Is there racism?
I got stats too when you get a chance.
But rather than saying that, why don't you just, in this case, can you do me a favor? If you were that officer, would your actions have been different? I think it might. By the way, in this case, I think my actions would have been different. But we have to say is, if you were out there that day, and if someone who had just fired a shot at you reached to their waistband and you know there's a gun involved, what action would you take? Now, I would say, just based on my training and experience, the chase might have been tactically inappropriate. The fact that 60 rounds apparently was fired, that's outrageous. That's a training issue. Those things need to be addressed. But just to say, well, it's an unarmed black man and racism is involved, maybe it was, but I don't know that. And frankly, neither do you.
Dr.
Well, I'm going to stand by what I said.
So when we talk about statistics, I'm sorry, Dr. Eaves. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
You're too polite, gentlemen. Dr. Eaves, please finish.
So we have to look at over the last 5 years, we have a situation where over 400 people have been killed in traffic stops by officers. When you look at the situation with Jayland, we have a situation where, can we talk about the fact that he was shot at over 60 times because there were 60 bullets in his body, and when he was brought out of the ambulance, he was handcuffed with his hands behind him. Is that police training? I mean, we can talk about this all day in terms of statistics. You have yours, and I have mine. But at the end of the day, we have to look at the disproportionate number. The gun that was in the car. The gun that was in the car was not on him when he was shot at. And the police, for them to say in their statement that is standard operating procedure, I agree with them, because that has been standard operating procedure for black people for far too long, from Amadou Diallo, the list goes on and on.
That's complete. You're missing the point. Was the gun in the car? Yes. I mean, I implore you, because I think it
wasn't on him when he was slaughtered and turned into mincemeat. It was not on him when he was turned into mincemeat. You see,
when you do that, you're not focusing on the issue. But the issue number one is you have a car stop. You have a subject who fires a round. Do you think that action change the dynamic, or would you maintain that if he had just pulled over, here's my license and registration, they say you have a tail light out, is he still getting shot to death? If you say yes, I certainly hope that's not the way you think.
What I know is that Dylan Roof is still alive. I know that the shooter in Highland Park, Chicago, was still alive. I know that there's so many issues where white people who are armed to the teeth end up surviving. Yeah, but he's alive. He's alive. There's a big difference. And an unarmed black man is seen as more dangerous than an armed to the teeth white man. We got to talk about that. Colorado shooting.
Oh, that's just absurd. That's absurd. I'm sorry.
Proportionality. Proportionality. You want to talk statistics?
He's still alive.
Look at the statistics.
Sorry?
Look at the statistics. I'm talking about numbers. You want to talk stats? Let's talk numbers.
Okay. Yeah, but okay. You didn't answer the question. If that car stop did not involve the shooting and the flight of Mr. Walker, are you suggesting those officers would have shot him? I'm trying to understand what your dynamic is.
What I'm saying, to answer your question, answer your question directly,
what's the justification?
I do believe that people should not flee the police.
Hold on.
Yes, gentlemen, it's
but that doesn't justify the response.
Yeah.
And what's the rationale?
I do believe that people should not flee the police.
I'm trying to hear too. I'm sorry, I can't see you guys, so I don't know who's...
Yeah, Dr. Eaves, please, we have a minute left to wrap up this part of the debate. We'll obviously continue in a second, but your thoughts on what we've just heard.
Again, I just think that there's something called implicit bias. I mean, I think that people do their actions are sometimes dictated what's subconscious or underneath the surface. And implicit bias training is often recommended for law enforcement. I think is certainly needed, and I think that this was a case where folks were shooting a black man, and they may not have shot a white man the way that they shot this particular black person.
Yes.
More white men are shot than black men, right? You know that, right?
Now we're talking about percentage-wise. So black people are 13% of the American population.
Of the population. Come on now, see, 13% of the I'm sorry, Dr. Eaves, you were responding to that. You hit it. Go ahead.
50% of the homicides perpetrated in this country are perpetrated by African Americans. It's a statistical imbalance.
Well, gentlemen, hopefully I will perform better as moderator so we can get all your input after the break, as we have so much more to unpack. Thank you very much for your thoughts. You're staying with us. We're taking a short break, but continuing this fascinating debate right after, so don't go anywhere. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for staying with us. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Dr. John Eaves, David Katz, and Dr. Omekongo Dibinga. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for staying with us. Before we go back to the debate, let's take a listen to some eyewitnesses from the incident. Let's take a listen and pick up the debate right after.
We do not know the exact number of rounds that were fired. I will say this, that it was difficult to watch and shocking, just like it is for everybody. I'm not passing judgment on the decisions my officers made. They will be given the opportunity to explain why they did what they did, as they should.
We are done dying! We are done dying!
I'm not blood family, but I'm family. I've known them all my life. And it's very emotional. And it's like deja vu. And every time you turn around, you're seeing it on TV, you're seeing it. But until it hits home, that's when it's so bad.
What do we want? When do we want it? Now!
What I'm here to say is that we are done dying like this, in this manner, with this fate. Nobody should ever suffer the fate that Jayland Walker did.
Yes, not eyewitnesses, obviously, but different angles to this situation. And gentlemen, let's kickstart this debate with another 30 round each. And I was debating among myself, what should we begin with? But you know, in his masterpiece, Curse on Earth, Frantz Fanon talks about violence as a crucial element then in the context of decolonialization, saying that it's a matter of replacing one kind with another. Obviously, a very different context here, but he's talking about the how violence is a key element in such a revolution. And my question to you, and by that we will start the debate, will violent protests help the cause or just push people further away from it. Dr. Eaves, please.
Yeah, I mean, for me, coming from Atlanta, Georgia, the birthplace of the civil rights movement, where Martin Luther King Jr. Was born and lived, I got to say that nonviolence is not the way to go. It should be peaceful protests. In this example, in Akron, Ohio, the family called for peaceful protests. In 2020, when we had Black Lives Matter protests around the country, here in Atlanta, there was violence downtown, looting, and it was counterproductive. So I think nonviolence is the way to go.
Dr. Dibinga?
I definitely believe that nonviolence is the way to go. I believe that in many of these situations, much of the violence occurs at night when people are coming in from across borders and don't represent the community that's actually there to peacefully protest. And we also have people who are anti-Black Lives Matter who also want to stir up some trouble, and they kind of show up, throw rocks, and hide their hands. And that's also an issue. But violence is definitely not the way. And we need to look at ending this police violence against Black people primarily, because there's a difference between Black people or human beings and people like police officers who are human beings who take an oath to protect the community. It's a false equivalence to keep comparing the two.
Right. It's not an equal matter here. Mr. Katz, your take?
Yeah, well, clearly, nonviolent demonstrations, protests, that is the American way. That is going to get any movement that you feel passionately about is going to get a lot further. And once again, I know that there's always a movement to blame people other than the Black Lives Matter leadership. But I'm from New York City. I've seen such incredible levels of violence as a result of Black Lives Matter protests, and it's just so counterproductive.
Yeah, but some suggest that nonviolence can only go so far. So I assume that this will be an ongoing debate. And yesterday, gentlemen, and please feel free to interact from this point onwards. Yesterday we had a debate over gun control, and the pro-gun panelists suggested that there's a media bias coverage when it comes to firearms, as in highlighting incidents that end tragically and not covering at all the use of firearms that is virtuous or helpful to an extent. In our debate, do you think there's a media bias when covering protests, let's say, Stop the Steal vis-a-vis Black Lives Matters? Dr.
Almost definitely. There's no question about it. Look, at the end of the day, if you have a Black Lives Matter protest and somebody burns one trash can, it'll be news for days, weeks even. Some news outlets are still showing that type of stuff now. But when you come to things like Stop the Steal or the January 6th terrorist insurrection, that's getting more treadway now because of the hearings. But we have to see that even in the media, the response of if it bleeds, it leads. People are always going to be more interested in showing some type of violence from one or two people at a Black Lives Matter rally versus the hundreds and possibly thousands of people who are out there protesting peacefully for peace. So every single day when I look at the media, I definitely see a bias. And like I said, all violence is wrong, but it's definitely not covered equally.
Dr. Eaves?
Yeah, I certainly agree. I think that there's a way that the media has a way of amplifying acts of violence that happens between Black folks and versus others. And so there really is a bias as well among the media and their betrayal of violence in our country.
Mr. Katz, maybe the bias here is, as you've said, highlighting incidents that involved Black people and not talking about all the times that there were, let's call it, bad encounters between police forces and white men.
Yeah, that's absolutely. Look at the January 6th coverage, and if you want to see intense media scrutiny, I'll point this out. Who was shot and killed during the January 6th hearing? It was an unarmed white female who was shot by a Black police officer. Can anyone tell me how many days in jail that Black police officer served? None, because he wasn't charged. It was completely by all use of force standards. That was an illegal shooting. Why wasn't he charged?
That's not true. It wasn't an illegal shooting, first of all. And number two, I'm sorry, he's protecting lawmakers. And number three, I don't see any problems that you have with. You have no problems with Darren Wilson getting off. You don't have any problems with the man who shot John Crawford and other people getting off. White officers who kill black people get off all of the time. This man who shot Ashley Babbitt was defending the Capitol, was defending democracy. Your double standard is glaring.
One step at a time. The double standard here is yours. Please tell me how the shooting of the female in the Capitol, how is that by any measure of use of force justified shooting? I'm waiting to listen.
You breached the Capitol to go through a window to get towards congressmen and senators and kill them. Does a threat only imply a gun? There were people there with sticks. There were people there with gallows. Does it have to only be a weapon? And Trump didn't want to let him in. Don't forget that.
Yeah, gentlemen, unfortunately, we're nearing the end of the debate.
Unarmed woman. And Darren Wilson? You mean the officer who was brutalized by Michael Brown? Listen, did you ever read the grand jury minutes? Or is that just something that wasn't interesting to you?
Yes, I also know that that Darren Wilson talked about being scared of Mike Brown because he was so much bigger from him, but they were the same size. And I also know that he talked about a lot of things that other eyewitness accounts didn't happen. And I also know that it didn't matter because they still decided to leave Mike Brown for 4 hours in the street like a dog. I'm sorry, but they don't treat dogs that ignorantly and negatively.
Dr. Eaves,
that was so horrible.
Dr. Eaves, please.
But you read the testimony of black witnesses who said Michael Brown was beating the officer. We know he was beaten. We know the first round was fired while Darren Wilson was still seatbelted in his cruiser. We know that.
Dr. Eaves.
Why is that?
So let me give you.
Michael Brown
let me give you another.
Was Ashley Babbitt.
Racism.
Let me give you another.
Gentlemen, please, gentlemen.
Yes.
Dr. Eaves, please summarize in the short seconds we have left.
Yeah. So there's evidence that when a black person does something, perpetrates a crime, and a white person perpetrates a crime, that person, the black person, has a higher chance of being arrested, may have a longer sentence than the white person. So there really is a mistreatment of black folks versus white folks in this country.
I am saying it with great sorrow, gentlemen, because I had so much more I wanted to unpack with you, but we are out of time, definitely not out of passion. Dr. Omekongo Dibinga, Dr. John Eaves, and Mr. David Katz, thank you very, very much for coming on the show. Hopefully we'll see you again.